My name is Sienna Myers. I am 34, and for 12 years, I have made a living catching people in lies. I am an investigative reporter at the Dayton Herald. I have faced contractors who billed taxpayers for work they never completed, public officials who hid money behind harmless-looking accounts, and sources whose documents collapsed under a single wrong date. I learned early that liars rarely panic when confronted. Most become calmer. They look you in the eye and repeat the version they need everyone else to accept. That was exactly what happened after my sister-in-law took a credit card from my purse at nearly 3 in the morning. By the time I woke up, more than $9,000 had been charged. There were airline tickets and a hotel package for Orlando. A phone and tablet had been ordered for store pickup. Several children's clothing orders were being shipped to my address. Every purchase pointed to Dana Caldwell. The airline reservation listed Dana and her 2 children as passengers. The electronics order used her phone number. The clothing was addressed to the house where she had been staying. None of it was hidden well, because Dana had never expected evidence to matter. When I laid the transactions on my kitchen table, my father-in-law, Frank Caldwell, studied them for less than a minute. Then he looked at me and said, "Dana would never do something like that." He did not ask why her name was on the tickets. He did not ask why her phone number was attached to the order. He did not even turn toward his daughter. I did not argue. Frank believed this was a private family problem involving my personal credit card. He thought he could write a check, order everyone to forgive each other, and close the matter before anyone outside the family learned what happened. Dana believed the same thing, but the card she took was not my personal card. It belonged to the Dayton Herald. That difference changed everything. I could not accept private repayment and pretend the charges had been authorized. I could not rewrite the truth because Frank preferred a quieter version. The account belonged to my employer, and my statement would become part of a company and bank record. 12 days later, Frank invited the family to Sunday dinner. 13 relatives came. Pastor Bill sat beside him. A cashier's check for more than $9,000 waited near my plate. Beside it was a lawyer-drafted statement saying Dana had permission to use the card. For the first time since I married Nathan, my place was not at the corner beside the serving trays. Frank had placed my chair directly next to his. I thought the seat meant I had finally been accepted. He thought the check would make me grateful. He thought the pastor, the relatives, and the good china would make refusal feel too costly. He believed I had come to decide which paper I would sign. Inside my purse, I carried a copy of the statement I had already filed, the receipt showing the exact date and time it was submitted, and the fountain pen that had belonged to my late father. They thought I had come to choose between family and the truth. What they did not know was that I had made my choice 2 days earlier. I had come only to tell them the price of the chair they were trying to sell me. 8 months before the theft, I married Nathan Caldwell. I was 36, a commercial heating and air conditioning technician, and the quietest person I knew who still noticed everything. He could enter a room and tell who had argued, who was pretending not to be angry, and who needed to leave before dinner became a fight. At first, I thought that made him perceptive, maybe even charming. Later, I understood that Nathan did not read rooms because he was naturally smooth. He read them because his childhood had depended on recognizing anger before it arrived. He could tell when his father was losing patience before Frank raised his voice. A change in breathing, a knife set down too carefully, a pause before an answer. Nathan noticed all of it. That skill had kept him safe long before I knew him. That spring, we bought our first house on the east side of Dayton. It was not large, but it belonged to us. I loved the uneven floorboards, the narrow staircase, and the kitchen window that caught the evening light. My purse hung from a wooden hook beside the kitchen door. It was practical. My keys stayed inside, and I could grab them each morning. More than that, the hook represented something I did not consider until later. I believed my belongings were safe inside my own home. Every Sunday, Nathan and I ate dinner at his father's house. Frank Caldwell was 66, a retired mechanic and a deacon at the local church. He sat at the head of the table, carved the meat, led grace, and decided which family problems were serious enough to discuss. Usually, he also decided how those problems would be understood. His wife, Margaret, had died 4 years earlier. Her chair remained empty beneath the table. No one sat there, no one moved it. My seat was always at the far corner, beside the serving trays and away from the main conversation, for months. I told myself the family was still getting used to me. Eventually, I realized the seating arrangement was not about comfort. It was a ranking. I wanted a real place at that table more than I admitted. I wanted Frank to introduce me without the faint pause he always used. I wanted Dana to stop treating me like Nathan's temporary attachment. I wanted to feel that marrying him had made me part of something larger than 2 names on a mortgage. That desire mattered, because it was the first thing the Caldwells would later use against me. Dana moved into our house after losing her job and receiving an eviction notice. She brought her 2 children, Kyle, 12, and Tessa, 9, who still slept with a stuffed rabbit missing 1 ear. Nathan asked if they could stay for 6 weeks. "Just until she gets back on her feet," he said. I agreed because of the children. Kyle and Tessa did not deserve to sleep in a car. The first warning came during the 2nd week. $60 disappeared from a drawer near the front door. A bottle of perfume began emptying faster than I used it. One of my scarves appeared folded across a chair in Dana's room. Small personal items returned to the wrong places. I locked my office door and moved my grandmother's jewelry into the fire safe. Then I told Nathan. He looked tired before I finished speaking. "Maybe you moved it and forgot," he said. I knew he did not believe that. He was using a familiar sentence to prevent a conflict from beginning after the money disappeared. I should have moved my purse upstairs. That was a security mistake. But leaving property inside my own house was not permission for someone to take it. The purse stayed on its hook because I wanted to believe my home was safe. I had secured the things I considered most valuable. I still did not believe Dana would search my wallet while everyone slept. The night Nathan left for a job in Columbus, I went to bed at 11. At 3:24 a.m. A floorboard creaked below me. A thin line of light moved beneath my bedroom door and disappeared. I thought Kyle was getting water. Then I went back to sleep. By morning, I understood that the sound had not been a child looking for a drink. It had been a woman returning a card after spending more than $9,000. At 6:40 the next morning, my phone was lit with fraud alerts. The first charge had posted at 2:47 a.m. Airline tickets, a hotel package, and theme park passes for Orlando. At 3:05, someone ordered a phone and tablet for store pickup. At 3:18, 3 children's clothing orders followed. The total was $9,184.63. I sat on the edge of the bed and read every alert twice. The electronics order was still marked preparing. The store had not opened, so no one had collected it. The clothing had not shipped. The airline payment was still being verified. Whoever had done this had moved quickly, but not quickly enough to outrun the systems behind the purchases. I called the number on the back of the card before changing out of my pajamas. I locked the account, reported the transactions as unauthorized, wrote down the case number, and took screenshots of every alert. Then I changed the passwords to my email and banking accounts. I opened the router dashboard and checked the access history. The purchases had come through our home Wi-Fi. The evidence was not subtle. The airline reservation listed Dana Caldwell, Kyle Caldwell, and Tessa Caldwell. The electronics order used Dana's phone number and customer account. The children's clothing was being shipped to my address. I went downstairs. Dana stood at the stove frying eggs. She was humming. My purse still hung beside the kitchen door. When I opened my wallet, the corporate card was in the wrong slot and facing backward. Someone had returned it in the dark too quickly to remember how I kept it. In the kitchen trash, beneath coffee grounds, I found a printed itinerary. Dana glanced at it in my hand and kept turning the eggs. "We need to talk about last night," I said. She looked at my phone, where the alerts were still open. "Maybe you got hacked. The hacker used your phone number, your account, your children's names, and my Wi-Fi." Dana slid the eggs onto a plate. "You know how these people work. They steal real information." She did not explain why the itinerary was in my trash. She did not ask whether the charges could be stopped. She did not look surprised. She was too calm because she was not waiting to learn whether she had been caught. She was waiting for someone else to make being caught disappear. Nathan returned from Columbus shortly before noon. I showed him the screenshots, itinerary, order details, and the card sitting backward in my wallet. He went pale. Then he called his father. Frank arrived less than an hour later in his church jacket. He walked into my house, sat at the head of my kitchen table without being invited, and listened for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he said, "Dana would never do something like that." He wanted me to cancel the dispute. He said no one needed to call the police, and the bank did not need to become involved. He would write a check, speak to Dana privately, and handle everything inside the family. Nathan sat between us. His shoulders straightened, both hands rested flat on the table. He did not look at his father. I had seen my husband nervous before. I had never seen him become younger. I did not spend another hour arguing over evidence that already had names, timestamps, addresses, and account records attached to it. "Dana and the children will leave this house before tonight," I said. Frank leaned back. "You are putting 2 children on the street?" "No, I am moving them into your house. You have 3 empty bedrooms. Do not use the children to rename a boundary." Dana pushed back so hard her chair scraped the floor. She accused me of punishing Kyle and Tessa. I told her they had done nothing wrong. Nathan could visit them, pick them up, and bring them back when she was not present. But Dana could not continue sleeping under the roof of a woman whose wallet she had searched in the middle of the night. Nathan hesitated. Then he stood. Hai carried Dana's suitcases to Frank's car. He asked for the house key and waited until she placed it in his hand. When Kyle asked whether they were being abandoned, Nathan crouched beside him. "No, you still have me. This is about what the adults have to fix." It was not enough to repair what had happened, but it was the first time Nathan chose an action that made the conflict real instead of smoothing it over. On Monday morning, the finance department at the Dayton Herald called my desk. "We have a fraud alert on the corporate card issued in your name," the woman said. I looked at my wallet. Until that moment, I had assumed Dana had taken my personal card. She had not. Dana had taken the only card in my wallet that an apology, a check, and a family dinner could not turn into a private matter. The finance office at the Dayton Herald was 3 floors below the newsroom and always smelled faintly of toner and burnt coffee. Carol from accounting closed the door after I entered. The newspaper's counsel sat beside her with a yellow legal pad and the kind of expression that made reassurance impossible. He began with the simplest fact. "The Dayton Herald owns the account," he said. "The card carries your name, but the company is the cardholder." Under the Herald's agreement with the issuing bank, the paper had 10 business days to submit an affidavit of unauthorized use. The company also had to create a formal incident report so the bank and the Herald's insurer could determine the loss, preserve records, and decide what happened next. I asked whether signing the affidavit meant Dana would automatically be prosecuted. "No," counsel said, "that decision will not belong to you. It may not even belong to the bank. Investigators and prosecutors decide what they do with the evidence." My responsibility was narrower. I had to answer one question truthfully. Had Dana been authorized to use the card? She had not. Counsel then explained the alternative Frank wanted me to create. If I claimed Dana had permission, the Herald could treat the charges as my personal misuse of a corporate account. I could become personally responsible for the money, face an internal investigation, and lose the trust required to keep working as an investigative reporter. A false statement submitted to persuade the bank to close a fraud file could also create legal exposure of its own. He did not tell me I would certainly be charged with anything. He said something more precise. "You would turn yourself from a witness into part of the concealment." I signed the affidavit less than 48 hours after discovering the charges. I did not need 10 business days to decide whether theft became permission because a father offered repayment. I used the deadline to protect the record, not to negotiate with it. I did not tell Frank immediately. That was not hesitation. It was containment. I wanted the true statement filed before he could surround it with phone calls, relatives, and a softer version of events. That evening, I told Nathan at our kitchen table, "I signed it," I said. "What I do not know is where our marriage will stand when your family finds out." Fear crossed his face before he could hide it. "Can you hold it for one day?" "It has already been submitted." Nathan did not shout. He did not accuse me of choosing my job over his family. He sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the grain of the table. Then he stood and began doing things. He changed the code on the front door. He reset the Wi-Fi password and removed Dana's devices from the network. He checked every spare key, wrote down who had one, and called the 2 people who needed to return theirs. That night, he installed a locking drawer in my office for the corporate card and work documents. None of it erased the fact that he had called Frank before standing beside me. But action was different from apology. It gave the boundary weight. The next afternoon, Dana returned with Frank to collect the last of her belongings. She stayed near the car while Nathan carried boxes from the den. Tessa came inside for her one-eared rabbit. She found me beside the stairs and looked up with the solemn expression children wear when adults have failed to explain enough. "Is Mom in trouble because we wanted to go to Disney?" I crouched so we were at the same height. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups get into trouble because of choices grown-ups make. You are not the reason your mother did this." Tessa held the rabbit tighter. I realized I was not only answering her, I was answering the part of myself that still believed another person's consequences became my fault if I refused to prevent them. 2 days later, Frank came to our house alone. He carried a cashier's check for $9,184.63, a document prepared by a lawyer, and a pen. He placed all 3 on my kitchen table and promised the matter could end that evening if I signed. Frank had not come to repay the money. He had come to purchase another version of the truth. Frank placed the cashier's check in the center of my kitchen table. The amount was exact, $9,184.63. Beside it, he set down the document his lawyer had prepared. It stated that Dana had been authorized to use the card, that every purchase had been made with my knowledge, and that no fraudulent transaction had occurred. "You sign," Frank said. "I repay every cent. Dana pays me back later." "Later when?" His expression did not change. "She will do what she can. That is not a date." Frank tapped the check as if the numbers answered everything. I told him the money was not mine to accept. The Dayton Herald owned the account. The newspaper could not take a private payment from my father-in-law and use it to alter a fraud record. Dana had never been authorized to use the corporate card, and no signature written afterward could create permission in the past. "Families do not need records," Frank said. "Then why did you bring me a document?" For the first time, his face tightened. I gathered the check, the statement, and the pen before leaving. He said I was allowing paperwork to become more important than people 2 days later. He sent another cashier's check directly to the publisher of the Dayton Herald. This time it came with a letter. Frank called the theft a family dispute. He claimed I had previously allowed Dana to use the card and had changed my story after becoming angry. He asked the newspaper to accept the money, close the account, and stop treating a misunderstanding as fraud. The Herald could not accept the check, but Frank's letter created a new problem. Human Resources opened a formal review. My card records, reporting history, and prior expense reports were examined. Colleagues who had once trusted my judgment began lowering their voices when I entered the break room. No one accused me directly. They did not have to. For a reporter, suspicion did not need to become a verdict before it started damaging the work. Ruth Okafor, my editor, called me into her office and shut the door. "He does not need to prove you lied," she said. "He only needs to make your file look complicated." That sentence followed me home at 16. I had watched my mother sit on the edge of my bed holding a shutoff notice from the electric company. I had saved money for college by babysitting and working register shifts after school. Every dollar was folded inside an envelope in my closet. I gave her all of it. She kissed my forehead and said, "You are such a good girl. You never make things worse." The electricity was still disconnected 3 months later. The money was never returned. I went to college on loans and spent years paying them off. Until Frank's letter reached my newsroom, I had remembered that night as proof that I had helped my family. Now I understood the bargain more clearly. I was not afraid of doing the wrong thing. I was afraid of being called the person who made everything worse because I refused to pay for someone else. That same week, the airline canceled the Orlando booking after the disputed payment was flagged. The hotel reservation and theme park package were canceled with it. For several hours, Dana finally faced a consequence Frank could not explain away. Then he bought the entire trip again with his own money. Nathan called him and asked him not to do it. "The children should not lose a memory because the adults are angry," Frank said. "No one is angry over a misunderstanding," Nathan replied. "Dana stole the card." Frank purchased the flights anyway. He rebooked the hotel and restored the park reservations. Dana accepted every part of it without asking how repayment would work or what accepting it taught her children. That weekend, the Caldwell family group chat filled with photographs from Orlando. Dana stood in front of the castle with Kyle and Tessa beside her. Tessa was laughing, and I hated that the picture hurt, because her happiness was real. Neither child had chosen the theft, the lie, or the people using them as a defense. The caption beneath the photograph contained one word: Blessed. I looked at Tessa's face and understood how the system protected itself. It passed every consequence through the children until anyone who objected appeared cruel. Frank had not merely saved Dana from a consequence. He had turned the consequence into a vacation and asked everyone to call it a blessing. With Ruth's permission, I spent 2 lunch breaks reviewing only public records. I did not call confidential sources. I did not use restricted databases or ask anyone at the Herald to pull favors. I searched court filings, eviction records, small claims dockets, and one old police report that had already become public. Dana's name appeared more often than I expected. There were 2 evictions, both stopped after the balances were paid. Several small claims cases ended the same way. An old report from the dental office where Dana once worked described money missing from a cash drawer. The employer accepted repayment and declined to pursue charges. The amounts changed. The ending did not. Before the consequences became permanent, someone paid. Before a judgment or charge became permanent, the problem became money and the money disappeared. That someone was usually Frank. I printed nothing beyond what Ruth approved and recorded every search I made. I was not building a story for publication. I was trying to understand whether the theft in my kitchen had been one desperate decision or part of something older. The answer was waiting in our attic. Nathan found the box behind a stack of winter clothes. It had his name written across the top in thick, faded marker. He carried it downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. Inside was a paper route ledger from when he was 13. The final page showed $200 in savings, underlined twice in a boy's careful handwriting. Across the total, Frank had written, "Borrowed for Dana's braces, will repay." He never did, Nathan said. I checked that page every month for almost a year. Beneath the ledger was a photograph of Nathan at 14 holding a used electric guitar. He had bought it with money from weekend jobs. A year later, Frank sold it to cover the repair bill after Dana struck a parked truck. Next came a savings bond Nathan's grandmother had left him. It had been cashed early. The endorsement was not Nathan's signature. At the bottom of the box was an envelope marked Trade School. Nathan had saved the money for a technical training course. Frank used it to settle one of Dana's debts before the account reached collections. Each item had been explained as temporary. Each loss had been called borrowed. Nathan stood over the open box for a long time. He touched the photograph but did not pick it up. "I thought I was the child strong enough to handle it," he said. "But looking at all this, I was not taught how to help my family. I was taught that everything I owned was Dana's emergency fund. I did not rush to comfort him." "You were their victim," I said. "But for the last 5 days, I have also been a victim of your silence." He looked at me without defending himself. "I know. What Dad did to me explains why I sat in the middle. It does not make leaving you there alone right." That mattered, but words were no longer enough. The next morning, Nathan wrote a statement for the Herald's Council. He confirmed that Dana had never been authorized to use the corporate card. He described Frank's attempt to make me sign a false statement and provided a copy of the paper route ledger. He signed his name without asking whether the document would make his father angry. Frank called while Nathan was scanning the pages. He told Nathan this was between Dana and me. Then he called it women's business and ordered his son to stay out of it. Nathan put the phone on speaker. "You do not get to call this a dispute between Dana and Sienna," he said. "This is my family. I brought it into my wife's home. I will not leave her to handle it alone." Frank asked whether I was making him say those words. Nathan looked at the ledger. "No, I am finally saying them because she stopped saying them for me." After the call ended, He ran his thumb over Frank's handwriting. "Dad was not protecting Dana," he said. "He was practicing on me." We left the box open on the table that night. Neither of us put the evidence away. Because for once, Nathan did not want the past returned to storage simply because looking at it made the room uncomfortable. Shortly after midnight, Frank called again. He did not mention the check, the affidavit, or the newspaper. He asked Nathan one question. "Have you told your wife about the $40 yet?" Nathan told me the story the next morning. In 1971, when Frank was 11, his father wrote a bad check for $40 at a hardware store. The police came to the house during breakfast and arrested him in front of the neighbors. Frank stood on the porch in his socks while people watched from windows and driveways. The check did not directly cost the family their home. What followed did. Frank's father lost his job. Mortgage payments fell behind. His mother began cleaning offices at night and taking whatever work she could find during the day. Shame settled over the house. Money ran out, and the marriage eventually broke apart. $40 had not destroyed the family by itself. It had been the first event in a chain of unemployment, debt, humiliation, and loss. At Margaret's funeral, Frank had told Nathan the story once. Standing near his wife's casket, he said, "No one I love will ever be taken by the law again." I understood the promise. I understood why an 11-year-old boy might build his entire life around never feeling that helpless again. Frank had spent 50 years trying to prevent one morning from happening twice. But understanding was not surrender. I could feel compassion for the boy, standing on that porch, and still refuse the 66-year-old man asking me to lie. After Orlando, Dana came to our house because some of her mail had still been delivered there. I met her on the porch. She looked past me toward the hallway, as if she expected to be invited inside. I stayed in the doorway. The changed lock was visible between us. "I was going to pay it back," she said. "You know that, right?" "With what?" She folded her arms. "You have a job, a house. Nathan, my kids had never been on a plane. Frank has always helped when the family needed something. The trip was for them. How are you going to repay more than $9,000? Dana looked toward the street instead of answering. "You call it borrowing because that word is easier to live with," I said. "But a loan requires the lender to agree." She did not apologize. Instead, she asked whether I could tell the prosecutor the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. "I will not ask anyone to punish you," I said. "But I will not lie to prevent you from facing what you did." She took the mail and left. That evening, Frank called me. He reminded me of the one time I had handed Dana my personal card at a gas station. Her tank had been empty, and I had authorized one purchase. Then he mentioned relatives who remembered hearing me say I would help with the children whenever Dana needed it. He never openly said anyone would lie. He did not need to. "Family memories do not always look the same as your paperwork," he said. His tone remained calm, almost concerned, as if he were warning me about rain instead of suggesting that loyalty could blur sworn facts. I wrote down the exact wording as soon as the call ended. Then I informed the Herald's counsel and saved every message Frank had sent. Counsel instructed me not to discuss the case privately with him again and to preserve every future contact. The next afternoon, a cream-colored invitation arrived. Frank was hosting Sunday dinner. The entire family would attend. Pastor Bill would be there. The cashier's check would be placed on the table. The stated purpose was to close this painful matter through forgiveness. I showed the card to Ruth. She read it twice. "He chose the location, the witnesses, and the referee," she said. "That is not dinner. It is a hearing conducted by a court with no law." On Sunday afternoon, I packed my purse carefully. I placed inside a copy of the affidavit I had already filed, the receipt showing the date and time of submission, Frank's statement, and my father's fountain pen. Nathan set his paper route ledger beside the car keys. Neither of us said what we planned to do with them. Frank's dining room looked prepared for a holiday. Margaret's china covered the table. 13 relatives filled the chairs, with Pastor Bill seated at Frank's right hand and Dana directly across from me. Kyle and Tessa were in the next room with the television turned low. Beside my plate sat the cashier's check and Frank's lawyer-drafted statement. For the first time in 8 months, I was not placed at the corner near the serving trays. My chair was directly to Frank's left. I understood the gesture immediately. The chair had not appeared because I had finally become family. It had appeared because Frank needed my signature. Pastor Bill bowed his head and asked everyone to do the same. He prayed for forgiveness, healing, and the strength to keep anger from dividing people who loved one another. He spoke about mercy without once suggesting that the law should be ignored. When the prayer ended, Frank rested one hand beside the check. "I want this family whole again," he said. "Every dollar is here. Dana will repay me, no matter how long it takes." Then he looked at me. "Daughter, you sign the statement, the newspaper gets its money, and this ends. No more investigators, no more accusations. You will have your place here, every Sunday, the way family should." The word daughter landed differently this time. Frank had never used it when I sat at the corner of his table. He spent it only when he needed something from me. I did not reach for the paper. Instead, I turned to Pastor Bill. "What did Frank tell you this document was for?" Pastor Bill looked surprised by the question. "I was told it confirmed that the money had been repaid and that both sides agreed to end the dispute." I lifted Frank's statement and read the relevant lines aloud. Dana Caldwell was authorized to use the card. The transactions were made with Sienna Myers's knowledge and consent. No unauthorized use occurred. Pastor Bill looked at Frank. "That is not what you described to me." Frank's expression hardened. "Bill, this is a family matter. You invited me here to witness it," Pastor Bill said. "I will not witness a woman sign something she says is untrue." He placed his pen beside his plate. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one shouted. But several people stopped looking at me and began looking at Frank. Nathan reached beneath his chair and brought out the paper route ledger. He opened it to the final page and placed it in front of his father. "Do you remember writing this?" Frank glanced down. Recognition crossed his face before he could hide it. "Dana needed braces." "That is not what I asked," Nathan said. "I asked why my money never had to be repaid." Frank pushed the ledger back. "Families do not keep accounts against each other." Nathan kept his hand on the page. "No, in this family, only some people are never required to account for anything." I did not make a speech. He named the items one by one. The paper route savings, the guitar, the savings bond, and the trade school envelope. Dana stared at him. "I never asked Dad to take those things." Nathan turned toward her. "You did not have to ask. You only had to wait." Dana's face tightened, but she said nothing. I placed Frank's statement back beside the check. "There are 3 facts everyone at this table needs to hear." Frank opened his mouth, but Pastor Bill raised one hand. "Let her finish." I looked at Dana first. Dana took the card without permission. Then I looked at Frank. Frank offered me money and a place in this family if I would state the opposite of what happened. Finally, I looked around the table. Frank's pain explains how this system began. It does not give the system permission to continue. Frank's jaw clenched. I kept my voice level. You spent your life preventing your daughter from facing consequences. You also prevented her from learning that she could survive them. Dana looked down at her plate. Frank slid the statement toward me with 2 fingers. "Sign it," he said. "Then this ends." I opened my purse. The room seemed to lean toward me. I removed the copy of the affidavit I had already filed and placed it on the table. Then I set the submission receipt beside it, with the date and exact time visible. "This was filed on Friday." Silence took the room. Frank looked first at the affidavit, then at the receipt, and finally at the check. For the first time that evening, he understood that none of the objects he had arranged could change the record. The dinner had no power over the filing. The check had no bargaining value. Pastor Bill was no longer supporting him, and Nathan had chosen to speak in front of everyone. Frank stood. "Then you are not family." "If being family depends on my lying," I said. "It was never being offered to me." He turned toward Nathan. "Sit down." Nathan stood instead. "If family means asking my wife to take responsibility for what Dana did, then I am not staying either." He closed the ledger, picked it up, and came around the table. He helped me into my coat without asking whether I was ready to leave. Pastor Bill rose as well. "I will not continue participating in this conversation under the name of reconciliation." Several relatives looked down at their plates. One cousin stared at Frank. No one rushed to apologize. No one suddenly became brave. But the room was no longer moving as one body around Frank's decision. Nathan and I walked out together. Beside the car, I stopped before opening the door. "You left with me tonight," I said. "That matters, but it does not erase the days you let me stand alone." "I know," Nathan said. "I am not asking you to forgive me tonight. I only want to begin becoming the person who never asks you to do that again." The Dayton Herald completed its report and turned over the records requested by the investigators. The newspaper provided the account statements, timestamps, and internal card records. The retailer supplied the order history and pickup information. The airline confirmed that the reservation had been created through Dana's customer account and listed her, Kyle, and Tessa as the passengers. No single company possessed every piece of evidence. The bank did not somehow have Dana's entire digital life. The case came together because separate records from separate places pointed to the same person. The prosecutor's office reviewed the file and charged Dana with unauthorized use of a credit card. Her lawyer applied for a diversion program available to some first-time nonviolent offenders. Acceptance was not automatic. The prosecutor reviewed the amount, the evidence, Dana's prior public record, and whether the victim organization objected. I received notice of the request, but I was not asked to choose Dana's punishment. My role was to provide an accurate record and describe the pressure placed on me to change it. The Dayton Herald agreed not to oppose diversion if Dana accepted strict conditions. She had to admit responsibility in writing, repay the entire loss, complete 100 hours of community service, attend financial management classes, participate in behavioral counseling, avoid any new offenses, stop contacting me about changing my statement, and remain under supervision for 18 months. If she completed everything, the charge could eventually be dismissed. If she failed, the criminal case could resume. Frank immediately offered to pay the full amount. For the first time, money did not give him control. The repayment plan had to be signed by Dana. Payments had to come from income or assets in her name. Frank could help her find transportation or childcare, but he could not quietly replace her consequence with one of his checks. Dana reacted badly. "They only care that the money comes back," she told the program counselor. "Why should it matter who pays?" Because the goal is not only to restore the balance, the counselor said. The goal is for you to perform the repair. Dana found a job at a distribution center outside Dayton. She worked the early shift and took 2 buses at first. She disliked the hours, the steel-toed shoes, and the supervisor who expected her to arrive before the line started moving. She complained to Nathan more than once and nearly quit during her 3rd week. But she stayed. Frank continued offering to cover the payments. One evening, Nathan heard Dana refuse him over the phone. "If you pay this one," she said, "I still will not know whether I can do it myself." "You do not have to prove anything to me," Frank replied. That is the problem. The change was not dramatic. Dana did not become generous overnight. She still blamed me sometimes and described the case as something that had gone too far. But every month, a payment left her account instead of Frank's. At the Herald, Human Resources completed its review. The final letter stated that I had not authorized Dana to use the card, had followed the reporting procedure, and had committed no policy violation. Ruth did not throw a party or give a speech. She placed the letter in my personnel file and said, "Truth is not a prize, it is the floor. But at least this time, they did not take the floor away from you." Nathan began therapy on Tuesday evenings. He practiced letting Frank's calls go to voicemail. He stopped apologizing automatically whenever he set a boundary. When Dana created a conflict, he no longer positioned himself in the middle and asked everyone else to calm down. Most importantly, when he was afraid. He began telling me he was afraid instead of asking me to become quieter. Several months later, Dana came to our house alone. She remained on the porch. In her hand was a personal check for $86.40. It covered the $60 that had disappeared, part of the perfume she had used, and the cost of replacing the house key. "These were not in the prosecutor's file," she said. "I did not hug her. I did not tell her everything was forgiven. I accepted the check. Thank you for calling them what they were." Dana looked toward the living room window. "Can the kids still come over?" "Yes," I said, "with a clear schedule, and you ask first." She nodded. It was the first time Dana had requested access, instead of assuming that being family gave it to her 10 months later. Dana still worked at the distribution center. She had made every scheduled payment and completed most of her community service hours. She still complained. Sometimes she said the case had gone too far or that I had made the situation larger than it needed to be. But she did not leave the program, and she did not let Frank make the payments for her. She had not become a perfect sister, a perfect mother, or a grateful woman transformed by one lesson. She had simply begun doing the next required thing without waiting for someone else to remove it. Kyle and Tessa still visited Nathan and me. Dana texted before bringing them. Pickup and return times were agreed upon in advance. She did not walk into the house without permission, and she did not send messages through the children about money, Frank, or the case. The rules were ordinary. That was why they mattered. Frank did not change in the way people like to imagine at the end of stories. Sunday dinners continued at his house. According to relatives, he still said I had broken the family over money. He returned Nathan's Christmas card unopened and continued describing himself as the person who had tried to protect everyone. Pastor Bill sent me a private apology. He said he had attended the dinner based on incomplete information and regretted allowing his presence to be used as pressure. He did not ask me to return to church, forgive Frank, or repair the family. After that evening, he stopped participating in private Caldwell reconciliations. Nathan kept the paper route ledger on his desk, not because he wanted to remain angry. "It reminds me that something can be called borrowed and still be taken," he said. Our marriage did not become effortless. I still checked the lock when a floorboard creaked at night. Nathan still became tense when Frank called. We argued about holidays, the children, and how much contact was safe. But Nathan no longer asked me to soften the truth so his family would feel less threatened by it. When he was afraid, he said he was afraid. That was not a dramatic transformation. It was better. It was repeatable. My personal purse still hung from the hook beside the kitchen door. The corporate card did not. It stayed in the locking drawer in my office with my work documents. The entry code had been changed. No one kept a key simply because they shared blood with Nathan. Access had to be requested, understood, and given. I had not turned my home into a fortress. I had only stopped confusing trust with access. One evening, Tessa left her one-eared rabbit on our sofa. I noticed it after Dana had already driven away, so I sent her a message. She did not try the old door code. She did not arrive without warning. She replied, "Can I come by tomorrow at 6 to get it?" I stared at the message for a moment. Then I wrote, "Yes." It was a small exchange, no apology, no speech. But Dana had asked, and I had been allowed to answer. A relationship with limits was beginning to form through ordinary actions. Nathan and I bought a small table for the kitchen that winter. It had no chair at the head. When Kyle and Tessa visited, everyone pulled out a seat for themselves. No one was promoted closer to power. No one had to earn a place by keeping quiet. I once believed love meant paying the bill, so no one had to leave the table. I know now that some bills can only be paid by the person who created them. I did not deliver Dana to consequences. She walked there herself the night she took the card. I simply refused to stand in her place. The largest check I returned to Frank was not for $9,184.63. It was the entire debt his family had tried to transfer into my name. If you have ever been called selfish because you refuse to pay for someone else's choices, share this story with someone who needs it. And tell me, which paper would you have signed, or would you, like me, have signed before they could turn the truth into a family vote?